folks. I know we're a little bit late, but we wanted to keep the tension running. So here we are. I'm Priya Rao with the First Weekend Club, and our very first guest of honor for Miss Jen Holness. Welcome.
Hello, folks, online, digital people. Priya, the world.
The world. There you go. Canada.
I think big. I think the world.
Absolutely.
I'm going global.
I like it. See? This is why she's such a successful producer and writer. She thinks globally. Amazing. So we are so excited to have you as our first special guest for the Cinemaholics Happy Hour here at the Monarch Tavern. Welcome.
Thank you very much. It's exciting. I actually did not realize that I was the first. Wow. I have to say, I've been the first in a few things, but this is probably the most tasty and fun.
Oh, well, we like to hear that. Thank you. I'm glad we could give you a first that is exciting for you.
Yes.
So, the point of this event, and it's a monthly event here at the Monarch Tavern that we're doing in conjunction with the Canadian Film Fest, is to really foster a sense of community in Toronto, in Canada at large, in the world, of course, but starting right here in Toronto, because we find it's so hard to get people out to the theater to watch those Canadian films. And you've done everything. You've done documentaries, TV series, films. What has been your experience when you guys have your films at the theater?
Well, it's difficult. I mean, it is a difficult thing to get people to come out to the theater. I mean, our first feature was, we've done 2 feature films, television, documentaries, but our first was probably the most successful, and it was in terms of bringing an audience out, and it was literally the most sexy possible scenario. It was Love, Sex, and Eating the Bones. It won the best first feature at TIFF, but it was about a guy who was addicted to pornography, who meets and falls in love with a woman who's celibate and can't get it up. So, that was, so that kind of drew people in. But literally, short of porn and celibacy,
it's a meaty topic.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge to get us out.
And you guys did some really interesting things with your marketing for that film. I remember you didn't just let the film market itself. You had some real plans in place. You tried to think outside the box to really draw people in. And that's what you have to do as a filmmaker these days.
Yes, absolutely. I think this was like 92, 93. And at that time, I do think in some ways it was more difficult because there was no social media. And so what we actually did is that we had this thing where, you buy one, get one free kind of a thing. Because we kept thinking, well, it was like, we were like, what would get me into the theater, right? It's like, okay, date movie, and I get to go, and I could bring my, my boyfriend or whatever, because, we were thinking that the age, that 18 to 25, 35 kind of a thing. Bring my date and have, a really good time, but you would have to, half price kind of a thing. And we were thinking of that half price Tuesday kind of vibe. So that was our sort of the inspiration for something like that. And, the film was really, really embraced in Toronto and Ontario, for example. But, as we sort of veered outside of nationally, we had a bit more of a challenge. But, the film went on to be sold at Showtime, at Stars, BET. It went international. So, I mean, so with sort of that those big U.S. sales, a very decent Canadian release and international presence, it was a success. But again, it's really, really challenging, particularly if you do what we try to do, is we try to delve into diverse communities a little bit more than the average filmmaker, because those stories aren't always being told. And and the big thing is to get people to A, get into theaters for any Canadian film, but B, when they see something that's a little bit different, to get them to say, hey, maybe that doesn't look like me, or maybe it's a little bit different, but I'm willing to give it a shot. And so that's kind of we're always pushing for that. We're pushing for people to say, hey, this narrative, it might be specific, but it also is general, and it's kind of
universal.
Yeah, universal. Absolutely.
Sure. I mean, we see people who don't look like us on TV and in theaters all the time, and yet those messages are universal. Absolutely. So it has to go both ways, right?
Yeah.
And I love that you did the 2-for-1, because it's the buy one, get one free. It's different from saying 50% off, because I like to get free stuff. So I don't care if it's the same thing to get 50% off. Just that word free, it's like, oh, I feel like I'm getting a gift, I'm getting a prize. So it was really brilliant marketing, and it worked for you so well.
Yeah, no, I think Films was involved. And I have to say, I was raised by a Caribbean, Jamaican mom, and there is not a thing I can buy in the world that my mom won't come back and say, what? $5? I could have gotten that for $1.99. So
I got shamed in India for trying to barter for a dress. Because they could tell that I wasn't from India, and they were like, "You're from abroad. Why are you bartering? Why are you being so cheap?" And then I just paid them what they wanted. Okay, fine. But everyone likes to save money here, especially Canadian filmmakers, because we're putting all our money into films. And again, this is what we're talking about: is trying to get people to come see your film, so that then you'll go see their film, and it's just sort of a so on and so on and so on scenario. It's so tough in Toronto specifically for some reason. Quebec has a really strong community. Vancouver is very tight-knit, and we have a lot of success out there. What do you think is holding us back here in Toronto in terms of getting people out to the theater?
You know, I think a big part of it is Toronto is incredibly diverse, and so it's about reaching into all the various communities. And again, I think someone looks at something and say, "Well, that's not for me," or we also have a lot of distractions. Toronto is one of, I wasn't born in Toronto, but I was raised in Toronto, and it's an amazing city, and there's just so much happening, and with so much distractions, something has to cut through the noise. I personally feel one of our biggest challenges is that there's not enough support in the media, for example. Saying, get your butt out and support this, or get your butt out and, get in front of this. And I think that that's a big problem, because there are so many distractions. People need to hear that this is interesting, or maybe it might not be perfect, but there's it's a really cool voice, And I think in Vancouver, I do think that the culture is a bit more, mono? It's like a bit more a monoculture, in the sense that it's not as broadly diverse, and
there's not as much happening all the time.
And so there's not that competition. So it's, we got some big city competition going on here. And of course, okay, I'm not saying Vancouver's not a big city, people, because I know people are going to be
Take it easy.
Because they're going to be like, what do you mean Vancouver is not a big city? It is a big city. I'm just saying that it's not.
It's more tight-knit.
It's more tight-knit. Yeah. That's a beautiful word. And I think Quebec, I look to Quebec with envy. I look to Quebec with envy because the language really builds on a community, and there's a sense that we got to be out there to support our films. And you know what? It's amazing because some amazing directors have been able to really bubble up through, and not just have a presence in Quebec, but internationally. And we haven't had that in Ontario and in Toronto in quite a while. And that's our dream. Like, we're hoping that that at some point, one of our films will be that global international film, but from filmmakers right out of Ontario.
Definitely. And you talked about the marketing, that we don't get enough spotlight from our own media here. And that's really why First Weekend Club was born about 14 years ago, was to try and fill that gap of highlighting Canadian films to the Canadian people. So this is the point of tonight's event and the ones moving forward. But let's switch topics a little bit, because not only are you a fantastic producer and writer, you are also a female producer and writer. And there's been so much talk over the past couple of years in Hollywood, in Canada, about the lack of female voices. Now, I know, because I heard a lot about your session at the Toronto Screenwriting Conference, the Female Gaze. People were talking about you on that panel. So can you just give us a little bit of your experience being a woman and some advice to women coming up in this industry?
Well, for me, as a female writer and producer, I started in this business first and foremost as a producer. And I like producing a lot. In fact, I love producing, but I really love writing. And I know that the space where I came up in, it made it easier for me to be a producer, because in many, many ways, that is, it's the least glamorous of let's say the trifecta: writing, producing, directing. It's the least glamorous. It's the grunt work, and if you're organized and if you really have a desire to get things done, then you will love that work, and I do love it. But it actually took a little while for me to realize and to be supported on the creative side in terms of the writing piece. And I do think a lot of it comes from the fact that there is a very clear patriarchal white male culture that dominates the creative industries. And,
and any industry.
Pretty much every, in fact, every industry in actual fact. But in terms of our industry, it has been a real struggle, because, I would walk into rooms and people would look around for the guy who came behind me, literally. I've had so many experiences where I think even as a woman of color, people just didn't believe that it was my company, or people just didn't believe that I was, I'd gotten these things done, or had completed these projects. I still have that. People still, they go on my website and they're like, wow, did you do all this? And so I think that's a part of, the expectations of what they expect from women and from women of color. But I think for me, as a black woman, I was raised by a really strong mom. And my mom told me that I could really accomplish whatever I really put my heart to and set my soul towards, as long as I sort of jumped in and gave it my all. And that's kind of been how I've approached it. And I think that perhaps has helped with my success. But I also think that, I work with Suds. And having a talented partner that people really sort of got behind also was a factor. And as I develop in my own sort of creative voice and so forth, what I've really come to realize is how much the cultural point of view has shaped me, to the point where, I've always brought female characters to the forefront in terms of our work. There's been stuff that we've developed where, Suds never really thought about a female point of view or a female character, and I've been at the forefront of pushing that. But what I now realize as I've gotten older and really understanding what the female gaze is, I've come to really understand that my perception has always been within a male framework. And so for me, what I'm hoping in the next decade or so, that the work that I develop will actually come from a female point of view, right off the top, not as a strong female character entering, but that's like at the center of the narrative.
Starting point.
Yeah, starting point, exactly. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts in my understanding or my vibe around the creative industries. And I have been a woman who's stepped into the boardroom from the very beginning, right? So it's a change, and it's an important one.
That is really, I think, sort of an aha moment, and it must have been for you. And to hear that, for me, just thinking, when we are making movies and when filmmakers come to us, we're entering this society that we have grown up in and have been cultivated to understand this is the way the world works. So we enter with our projects to fit that world, but we don't need to. We can create our own world.
Yeah,
that had to be incredibly liberating for you.
Absolutely, because for example, with Love, Sex, and Eating the Bones, for example, it was really important for me to make Jasmine be a strong character and have her own agency, right? But Jasmine was always, though, the secondary character to Michael, right? With Guns, same thing. And so I think Shoot the Messenger was probably the first show that we created with a female character at the center of it. But I do think that when we were creating that show, we were working from a familiar male narrative. And so I'm really excited about potentially season 2, if that happens, because I really feel like I'm creatively, I really understand where we need to go. and I'm excited about going there. And that's what, when we talk about the female gaze, it's not just creating strong female characters, but really it's incorporating what are some of the most elemental things that females care about, which incidentally is different from males, and it's actually okay.
That's okay.
You know? And so those kinds of things, you know, like, for example, in the show, in Shoot the Messenger, I was really excited about developing her family arc. And I have to tell you, we actually fought in the writing room because some people felt like, well, you know, do we need to do that? Like, let's focus on the mystery, let's focus on the narrative. And I was like, no, let's you know, we want to see her sister, we want to see her father, all those kinds of things. Because I do feel a part of the female gaze is that, I know for me, in my family, and the women in my family, we are the keeper of the family culture. And, you know, my brother, for example, lovely guy, but, you know, when a girl comes in, like, he's more connected to that side, to her family, right? Sud's coming into my family, I'm pulling him to my family. So that's what I mean. I feel like the females are the keeper of the culture. And so, and what that means for me, and I have 3 daughters, so what that means for me is that that emotional core, keeping that vibe, that is so important to me as a woman, and I want to feel that in the dramas that I create, more so than just like, you know, the plot and the moving forwards and all those kinds of things. So I do think that, you know, there's an emotional space that we're getting to explore that's beyond having a strong, you know, tough female character.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, tough female lead doesn't necessarily have to mean that she has no sensitivity or vulnerabilities, right? And I think a lot of times people think that she just needs to be tough and women can't be seen as weak because that's what they've always been seen as. So if you're a female producer, you need to create those tough, iron women. But there are levels to all of us. And so I think it's really interesting that you mentioned being the keeper of that culture and in some ways the keeper of the morals and the sense of what's right and wrong in some ways, you know, to bring that heart to the story.
Well, the thing is that we have to define what is weak. Is crying weak? I don't think crying is weak at all. I mean, I actually think that through crying, for example, you are able to reconcile what is happening with you emotionally. You're actually releasing. So why is it that we're fearful? Like, dudes have always been afraid to cry, you know? We've created a culture where men don't cry, right? Boys don't cry, you know? And then girls cry, but we don't want to see girls crying because if they're crying, it's uncomfortable or they're weak or whatever. And I don't believe that. I feel like that there's a lot of power, for example, in crying and releasing and being fucking pissed and emotionally drained and all those kinds of things. And those are some of the things when I watch, like, you know, great television that really pulls me in. And so I think what it is that we have to redefine what is weak and we have to redefine what is strong. And if, you know, and every human being brings a certain perspective to the table. And so it's about being true to that perspective that you truly feel and you truly believe in and not letting someone else tell you it has to be this way. It has to be that way, you know? So just an example of this is a totally different thing. I'm working with Anita Lee, and Leah Marin is my producer at the National Film Board for this documentary. And so Leah was the producer on Charles Officer, who was a wonderful... one
of our favorites.
One of our favorites, absolutely. But she's one of the producers on Charles Officer's film, and Charles is amazing. But the film, Unarmed Versus, is about a community that is going through a lot of changes because there's revitalization, but it focuses on the characters. And the main character is a young girl named Francine. And Francine, to me, was the most beautiful character I've seen in years. She was deathly shy. She's in any stretch of the imagination a little bit odd, you know? But she has this really unbelievably poetic voice, right? And it is a character we rarely see at the center of a documentary, you know. And I contrast it to a film like Step, where I literally saw, and I love both films, by the way, but in Step, I saw literally a girl who could, like, was literally the most beautiful female I've seen in years. I mean, Beyonce, watch out. This girl, she's both African, one African American, one African Canadian, one drop dead fucking gorgeous, and the other one simple, sweet, and both of them troubled. And I know in the traditional narrative that we are used to, the female lead in Step, that gorgeous, beautiful character, we could all identify with her. And our Francine character in Charles's film, it's not the character we typically see. And I've actually had people come to me and say stuff like, I don't know if Francine was, the strongest choice. And I'm like, are you friggin' kidding me? She was an amazing choice. She was an amazing choice because someone like Charles, who has developed a certain voice, could see her beauty and her humanity, right? And that's what happens when different voices get in there. It's not the same narrative. Step was a fabulous film, but it was very much followed a narrative I've seen many, many times. Whereas Unarmed Verses follows a different narrative, and that narrative comes out of a different point of view. And I think that to be able to make that film, to bring that character to the front of stuff, that is what we're here for. And that's what these different voices that need to come into the industry, these voices that need to be supported, can bring to the table. And it'll help shape and change how we understand narrative.
Well, and for whoever said that she maybe not was the strongest choice, clearly she was, because Charles Officer won the Best Canadian Documentary at Hot Docs this year. So kudos to him. Jen, we could talk to you all night. Your passion just exudes from you. So many words of wisdom. Thank you so much for being here. I know a lot of people want to continue talking to you, so we won't monopolize you anymore, but it's been such a pleasure and an honor to chat with you, and we hope you'll come out for the next ones. And good luck with the stuff that's coming up, because I know you have a lot going on. Jen Holness and Sud Sutherland, Hungry Eyes. If you haven't heard of them, check them out. They're doing amazing stuff.
Thank you so much. And it was great to be the very first, and being a woman at it too.
Yeah. First Week in Club's all about women power, so bring it in, sister. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thank you.